There's a curious pattern when it comes to fashion choices. While some colors dominate wardrobes everywhere, others are noticeably absent. You'll walk through crowded cities, scroll through social media, or attend gatherings and quickly realize certain shades are rarely worn. It's not just about trends or seasonal shifts, it runs deeper than that. Most people instinctively avoid specific colors without ever stopping to question why. The answer isn't always conscious, it's psychological, cultural, even emotional. These colors might carry unspoken meanings, trigger subconscious reactions, or simply feel too bold or complicated to wear confidently. What we avoid in our clothing often says more about us than what we choose. It's not just fabric and dye, it's identity, perception, and social response, all stitched into one silent decision. We often think of color as a simple aesthetic choice, something we pick to match our mood or complement our skin tone. But in reality, color carries weight, meaning, and psychological impact that goes far beyond surface level. One of the most powerful reasons people avoid certain colors isn't because they dislike them, but because those colors provoke something inside. It could be discomfort, tension, overstimulation, or even vulnerability. The truth is, we are all deeply conditioned by emotional memory, and color has the unique ability to bypass rational filters and speak directly to that memory, often without us realizing it. Take yellow, for instance. It's one of the least worn colors in everyday fashion, despite being associated with brightness, energy, and joy. Why? Because its psychological impact is more complex than it appears. Yellow is stimulating to the brain. It grabs attention, it heightens awareness, but it also increases anxiety in many people. It can feel sharp, even overwhelming, especially in large doses. This isn't just anecdotal, it's backed by color psychology studies. Certain shades of yellow have been found to make babies cry more and increase agitation in enclosed spaces. So when someone avoids wearing yellow, they're not just rejecting the shade, they're subconsciously avoiding the feeling it provokes. The same principle applies to other intense colors like red or orange. Red is powerful, passionate, bold, but it's also associated with danger, confrontation, and dominance. In a society where many people are already anxious about how they're perceived, wearing a color that demands attention can feel like stepping into psychological exposure. It's not just, will this look good on me? It's, will this draw more attention than I can handle? In that moment, the color becomes a mirror, reflecting not just how others might see us, but how we see ourselves and what we're willing to reveal. Then there are cooler colors like deep purples or stark blacks. Purple, historically linked to royalty, can also evoke a sense of mystery or aloofness. It's a color of introspection, of depth, but also of isolation. Wearing purple can unconsciously communicate a need for space or even a barrier. And black, while widely worn, is often used more as a shield than a statement. It communicates control, seriousness, or even mourning. Many people are drawn to it for safety, for anonymity, but others avoid it because it feels too heavy, too severe, or too emotionally intense. So when someone says, "I just don't wear that color," it's rarely about fashion. It's often about feeling. It's about the subtle interplay between our inner world and the way we present ourselves to the outer one. Color becomes a form of nonverbal communication, and every person intuitively knows the message they're comfortable sending or not sending. There's also the issue of emotional history. Maybe someone associates a certain color with a traumatic memory, a specific time in their life, or a person they'd rather forget. Even if they can't articulate it, the color triggers a subtle unease, and so they push it out of their wardrobe. Other times they may admire a color on someone else, but feel like it doesn't belong to them, like it's too loud, too bold, or not their personality. But again, these aren't fashion decisions. These are psychological boundaries, self-imposed limits that come from internalized narratives about identity, worth, and expression. And while most people never take the time to analyze these reactions, the consequences can be profound. Because when we avoid certain colors, we might also be avoiding certain aspects of ourselves. Maybe it's confidence. Maybe it's softness. Maybe it's joy, creativity, or even confrontation. The colors we fear wearing often point to the emotions we fear expressing. And when we get used to avoiding them in our clothing, we can start avoiding them in our lives. So the next time you find yourself rejecting a color instinctively, ask yourself, what feeling does this color bring up? What am I afraid of expressing? Because sometimes wearing a color you've avoided can be more than a fashion risk. It can be a personal breakthrough. In the end, color doesn't just change how others see us. It reveals how we see ourselves. And the willingness to face that reflection might be the boldest style choice of all. There's a subtle fear that follows many people into their closets each morning, a fear that isn't about fit or even fashion, but about visibility, the fear of standing out. It may not be something we say out loud, but it influences our choices more than we realize. One of the strongest unspoken reasons people avoid certain colors is because those colors attract attention. And for many, attention feels like exposure. It's not just that a certain color is bright or bold, it's that it says something loudly, unavoidably, before we've even spoken. When someone wears a vibrant red coat, a neon green shirt, or a pair of electric blue shoes, they're stepping into a spotlight, whether they asked for it or not. That color announces their presence. It makes them unignorable. And for many people, that's deeply uncomfortable. There's safety in neutrality, in blending in, and disappearing into the background of the social environment. It's not always about modesty. It's often about self-protection. Wearing a color that draws the eye challenges our instinct to remain psychologically guarded. It asks us to be seen, not just physically, but emotionally. To wear a bold color is to suggest a bold identity. And not everyone feels ready to carry that message, because once you step into visibility, you invite interpretation. You open the door to opinions, judgments, assumptions, some flattering, some not. And that kind of attention, especially in a society as hypercritical as ours, can feel like pressure. Not everyone wants to be the one people notice when they walk into a room. Sometimes people just want to move through life quietly, without commentary. But there's also a deeper layer to this. The decision to avoid certain colors can be rooted in past experiences where attention didn't feel safe. Perhaps someone was mocked for what they wore as a child. Perhaps their confidence was shut down by someone they admired. Perhaps they grew up in an environment where humility was equated with invisibility, and to be seen was to be selfish or vain. Over time, these moments compound into subconscious beliefs. Keep your head down. Don't attract too much attention. Don't give people a reason to look too closely. And so colors like beige, gray, navy, and black dominate the racks. Not because they're inherently better, but because they're quieter. They let you pass through space without declaring too much. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it's worth asking, is this choice coming from preference or from fear? Interestingly, this fear of standing out isn't limited to introverts or shy personalities. Even confident, articulate individuals can hesitate when it comes to bold colors. Why? Because being seen on your own terms is different than being involuntarily noticed. In a world obsessed with image, even the confident are calculating the risk of being misread. Wearing a bright color isn't just about taste, it becomes a statement. It says, "Here I am." And for many, that statement feels far more vulnerable than empowering. But what if we begin to see color not as something that exposes us to criticism, but as something that reflects authenticity? What if boldness in color could mirror boldness in spirit? Not arrogance, but presence. Because here's the truth, most of the fear we have about being seen is based on imagined judgments that never fully arrive. And even when they do, they're rarely as devastating as we think. The people who stare may not be criticizing. They may be admiring your courage to wear what they wouldn't dare. And there's power in stepping into visibility, not to impress others, not to dominate a room, but to remind yourself that you are allowed to exist fully, colorfully, and without apology. that you don't need to hide in neutrality to be accepted, that you don't need to shrink to fit someone else's comfort zone. So if you've avoided wearing a certain color because you didn't want to be seen, maybe it's time to ask, what would it mean for me to step into the room as I truly am? Not louder, not performative, but more honest, more alive. Because color doesn't just draw attention, it draws truth. It dares you to be visible in a world that often prefers you muted. And in that simple choice of wearing what you once feared, you might discover the freedom of finally being seen on your own terms. Color is never just about aesthetics. It's a language, one deeply shaped by the culture we grow up in. And perhaps one of the most underestimated reasons people avoid certain colors is cultural conditioning. Most of us don't even realize it's happening, but over time, our relationship with color is quietly shaped by the values, taboos, and traditions of the society around us. What one culture elevates as sacred or stylish, another might interpret as inappropriate or even offensive. And so, without questioning, we internalize these meanings, and those meanings begin to dictate our choices, what we wear, how we express ourselves, and what we fear others might think. From a young age, we're told, directly or indirectly, what's acceptable. Boys wear blue, girls wear pink. Black is for funerals, red is too much. White might be fine for a bride, but maybe not for a regular day. These rules aren't always spoken aloud, but they're enforced in subtle glances, jokes, disapproval, or silence. And as those messages repeat over time, they become internalized truths. They begin to shape how we perceive ourselves in relation to color. So when we reach adulthood and look at a certain color with hesitation, it's not always a question of taste. It's often a form of unspoken cultural conformity. We've absorbed the boundaries, and now we police ourselves within them. Consider how different societies attach different meanings to the same colors. In the West, white often symbolizes purity, simplicity, or peace. But in parts of Asia, white is the color of mourning. What is considered elegant in one context is interpreted as somber in another. The same is true for black, seen as sleek and professional in Western business attire, yet traditionally avoided in celebratory occasions in other cultures. Red, which might be seen as aggressive or sensual in one region, is a symbol of prosperity and celebration in another. So the color itself never changes, but the meaning does, depending on where and with whom you're standing. That's the power of culture. It tells you what's acceptable, but more importantly, it tells you who you are allowed to be. And sometimes it does that through something as seemingly small as a color. But here's the deeper issue. When we allow culture to define our relationship with expression, especially through something as personal and visual as clothing, we may also be allowing it to shape our identity more than we realize. Avoiding a color because it's not what men wear, or not ladylike, or not appropriate for someone your age, can quietly reinforce restrictive rules and expectations. It tells you how to shrink into the version of yourself that others are more comfortable with. You begin to dress not as yourself, but as who you think you're supposed to be. And with that, authenticity gets traded for acceptability. Even religious or spiritual cultures have their codes. Modesty, reverence, and humility are often tied to certain color palettes, usually subdued, neutral, and unobtrusive. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But the danger lies in forgetting why we avoid certain colors. When modesty becomes fear, when reverence becomes repression, and when humility becomes invisibility, we're no longer making spiritual choices. We're reacting to cultural pressure. So the question isn't just, why don't people wear this color? The better question is, who told them not to? And who benefits when individuals mute themselves to match the expectations of the crowd? There's a quiet kind of courage in challenging those assumptions, not for the sake of rebellion or attention, but for the sake of integrity. To ask, what colors have I been avoiding, not because I dislike them, but because someone, somewhere, told me I shouldn't wear them? And what might happen if I stopped letting culture speak more loudly than my own voice? Because when you silence a color, you might also be silencing a part of yourself. Maybe it's joy, maybe it's softness, maybe it's power. Whatever it is, it's yours. And when you reclaim it, even in something as simple as a shirt or scarf, you're doing more than changing your wardrobe. You're rewriting the story that others once wrote for you. At some point, the question is no longer about color. It's about freedom and the courage to express yourself, even when your culture taught you not to, is where that freedom truly begins. There's another reason, often overlooked but undeniably practical, why certain colors are avoided in daily wardrobes. They're simply hard to work with, not emotionally, not symbolically, but visually. Some colors just don't cooperate easily. They resist coordination. They refuse to blend. They demand precision. And in a fast-moving world where people want convenience, predictability, and ease in how they present themselves, difficult colors often get pushed to the side, not because they lack beauty, but because they lack flexibility. We don't always think of it this way, but every time we get dressed, we're solving a small equation: aesthetic harmony, balance, contrast, tone, fit. It's a creative process, and some colors complicate that process more than others. A color like beige or navy is forgiving. It blends with nearly everything. You don't need to think too hard. But try introducing mustard yellow, chartreuse, or a bold magenta into your outfit, and suddenly you're navigating complexity. What shade pairs well? Will it overpower the rest of the outfit? Does it complement your skin tone, your accessories, your surroundings? That single color introduces friction. And unless someone is highly confident or deeply interested in fashion, most won't want to deal with that level of visual tension. But let's go deeper. Why does that friction cause so much hesitation? Because in a world that constantly demands our energy, mentally, emotionally, even socially, many people want their style to be effortless. Clothing becomes a psychological refuge, a space where decisions are simplified. So when a color presents extra challenges, it's often seen as a threat to that calm. Wearing something difficult means investing more time, more attention, more risk. And people are often taught, especially subconsciously, that those risks aren't worth it unless there's a guaranteed reward. So they retreat back to the safe zone: black, white, denim, gray, palettes that don't ask questions, colors that don't cause hesitation. There's also a deeper layer to this dilemma. When people feel unsure about how to style a color, they often feel unsure about how they'll be perceived. Will others think they're trying too hard? Will it seem like a fashion mistake? We're so accustomed to being evaluated, especially in the age of social media, that the fear of getting it wrong keeps many people from trying altogether. Better to avoid the color than risk the embarrassment of misusing it. But here's what's fascinating. The very colors we avoid because they're hard to match are often the ones that carry the most potential. They stand out, they challenge norms, they catch the eye. When used thoughtfully, they become a signature, an expression of confidence and creativity. The irony is that what's hardest to wear often becomes the most memorable. But most people never discover that because they stop at the level of surface difficulty. And maybe that's a metaphor worth sitting with. How often do we avoid what's meaningful simply because it's inconvenient? How many times have we stepped away from boldness, not because it was wrong, but because it asked something of us? The discipline to think, the willingness to learn, the courage to try and maybe fail. It's not just color, it's a way of living. There's no denying that some colors are more challenging to style, but maybe the deeper question isn't what's easy to wear. Maybe it's what are you willing to make space for? Maybe it's about seeing beauty not in convenience, but in intentionality. Because when you take the time to understand a difficult color, to learn how it interacts with others, how it plays off texture, how it reflects personality, you're engaging with more than fashion. You're practicing creativity. You're stepping into ownership of your choices, and you're refusing to let the difficulty of something determine its worth. And isn't that the kind of mindset we need more of? The colors we avoid because they're too hard to match might just be the ones that, when embraced, teach us the most about ourselves, about perception, and about the beauty that emerges when we're willing to try something a little harder, a little riskier, and a lot more honest. When we talk about color, we're never just talking about style. We're talking about identity, fear, memory, culture, and expression. Every shade we embrace or avoid reveals something about the way we see ourselves and the way we want the world to see us. Whether it's the psychological impact of emotion, the fear of attention, cultural conditioning, or the challenge of styling something unfamiliar, our choices are rarely just about fashion. They're about comfort zones and quiet boundaries we've drawn around our sense of self. But perhaps the deeper truth is this: the colors we shy away from often mirror the parts of ourselves we haven't fully accepted, explored, or expressed. And to wear those colors, to wear them unapologetically, is not simply to take a style risk, but to take back a piece of our own voice. Color can be rebellion, it can be healing, it can be a subtle form of liberation in a world that constantly tells us who we should be. So the next time you hesitate at a bold color on the rack or in your drawer, pause for a moment. Ask yourself what you're really avoiding. Because maybe it's not the color, maybe it's visibility or emotion or power. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what you were meant to reclaim.